dozens of other law enforcement and emergency service agencies from the whole metropolitan area that cover this area. It looks something like an anthill because the people are dwarfed by the massive size of the wreckage. When a 1,350-foot tower comes down, even in pieces, it makes a mountainous wreckage. It is at least 60 or 70 feet high, and behind its crest, a big black cloud of smoke continues to rise from what can literally be called the well of the world's sorrows. 82 people are known to have died here. The mayor of New York has requested 6,000 body bags. Those two numbers give you, I think, a very good sense of how little has been penetrated of this wreckage and how much more horror there is to be uncovered.
David, I want to move around to a number of our colleagues this evening, but before I let you go for the moment, and I should point out that we'll be coming back to you again also. When you spoke of the 80 known dead, you do not mention, of course, the firemen and the policemen who we know have died in the wreckage. Just a quick word on them. Lord knows they deserve mention at the top of this broadcast.
They certainly do, Ted. 202 New York City firefighters are still missing. 57 police officers, 200 other state employees. And I must say that missing must be presumed dead now. To see this wreckage, to have looked at this massive pancaking of floors and window frames compressed into, as I say, still a pile 50, 75, 80 feet high, but that was once 1,350 feet high. The vertical compression of the collapse of this building almost certainly has killed everyone who was within it. One note, though, Ted, that I want to pass on. The largest single renter in the World Trade Center, with 21 floors occupied by 3,500 employees. Morgan Stanley, the financial business company, reported that most, no hard number here, but most of their 3,500 employees on 21 floors in the area that was struck by the plane escaped this building and are alive tonight.
And one of the biggest jobs over these next few days, and this is one instance in which the internet is going to be of enormous value, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later too, is that people now are trying to find out quite literally by making contact and asking those who have survived to let people know. The compilation of lists is going to be, in many respects, the principal focus of this effort over the next few days. Dave Marish was talking just a moment ago about how the wreckage looks from the outside. We're going to get an extraordinary look now at how it looks from the inside. I'd like to turn to my Nightline colleague, Michelle Martin, in New York, who is joined by an amateur photographer who has some extraordinary video. Michelle?
Ted, I'd like to introduce you to Tim Cothran, who's actually a professional video journalist. He is a freelancer for ABC, and he was able to get inside what we are all calling ground zero of the World Trade Center today. And as you pointed out, he has some rather extraordinary video that we would like to show you now. We've condensed it, obviously, quite a bit. He shot about an hour of it, more than an hour. And Tim, why don't you tell us what we're seeing here? And about what time did you go in?
I started shooting tape about 2:30 in the afternoon. We entered the big atrium of the old the financial center, and this atrium used to be absolutely gorgeous. But in order to get to the wreckage, we had to go through this other building. At the top of these stairs, there was some graffiti that was actually written in the sand that's everywhere as a dedication to the brothers of all the firemen, and they all consider themselves brothers. And it's very, very important to them that they be remembered. And I thought that was a very special thing there.
What are we hearing here?
Well, a lot of saws, a lot of hubbub. And you walk forward, and here's this panoramic window of this vast, vast, vast destruction and all this activity going on outside.
What was the temperature like in there? Was it hot? Was it uncomfortable to be in there?
No, well, you know, we've been very fortunate that these days have been so beautiful in New York City. So it was eerie. Here you were in this enormous amphitheater of destruction, and it was just one of the nicest days of the year. But a tremendous amount of sawing and banging. And the guys work in teams. They help each other out. Sometimes if they find a particularly hot or interesting spot, they'll work in groups of 10 or a dozen. And it's all hands-on work. They're not using any heavy tools here, as you can see. They're going bit by bit. It's arduous, it's hard, and these guys are putting all their effort into it.
It also seems rather dangerous. I see many jagged pieces of metal. Did you have a sense of being in danger while you were on top of the rubble?
There's tons and tons of broken glass all over the place. I only had tennis sneakers on, so I was pretty worried. But you picked where you walked, and you just choose where you stepped.
What are we seeing here?
Well, this is poignant in that this is a fire truck. This is a badly charred fire truck. And it's one of the few things in this valley that has been actually kind of cleaned off and hosed off. Because it means a lot to these guys. I mean, you can see it's absolutely destroyed. The tires are burned, all the rigging is destroyed. And they're using it sort of as a table, as a setup area. And it really means a lot to them. It's a staging area, as well as a place where some people get very emotional, because a lot of guys died there.
And paying their respects.
And paying their respects.
Even as they continue to do the job to which they've been assigned today.
Absolutely.
Did you have a sense of being very far up? Did you have a sense of being a couple of stories up atop the rubble there?
It was really hard to gauge elevation because you're surrounded by some high pieces as well. You're sort of just this sensation of being in something of a valley. And it's just everything is smashed to atoms. There are no big pieces of anything.
And I think that this photograph speaks for itself. I think that everyone will recognize what is occurring here, that the remains of someone are being removed.
Exactly. In the 2 hours that I was there, I saw at least 10 body bags being lifted out, and they seem to find 2 and 3 sets of remains, and they used dogs. They called the dogs in, and the dogs have been there for, I'm sure, quite some time. In fact, before I left, they actually retired the dogs. The dogs actually got very fatigued, and they gave them the afternoon off, or the rest of the afternoon, which they certainly deserved. And they helped pick up body scents and so forth.
A sight that has become rather familiar from disasters in which Americans have volunteered around the world, but not one I think Americans expect to see here.
Just everybody pitching in, you know. It's the bucket brigade syndrome, where guys just move stuff out, they move it to the outside. And it was really hard, because even though this disaster only happened a day ago, these cadavers are starting to decompose, and it was hard. It was hard for everybody, and it made everybody realize that it's only going to get worse in coming days. These guys work in teams. They'll investigate a nook, a cranny. They'll put their heads together and come up with a plan.
And they're crawling under rather large slabs of plaster and concrete and metal. They don't seem very well protected.
Well, that's their job. They love it. They do it. There they are, scaling up enormous pieces of debris. And so as I was leaving, at about 5:15, everyone started running.
A sudden change of energy here. What's going on?
Absolutely. They got a call on the phone, over the horn, that the structure that was adjacent to us was unstable and may come down. So I hit the record button and started running along with everyone. We took a breath here to, see if there was anything else going on, and then we suddenly heard this rumble, which you may hear on the tape, and it scared me to death. And that was it. We just bolted. The 60 pounds of gear I had on me weighed nothing. who just flew out of there, scared to death.
And when did you begin to calm back down? How long did it take before your heart rate came back down and you...
Well, I'll tell you what, watching this stuff brings it right back up. I'll tell you that. And it makes you realize what these guys and women are doing and how much it means to them.
Ted, as I said, some rather extraordinary footage from Tim Cothran, freelance video journalist, a freelancer for ABC, and I can tell you that he's still actually covered with plaster dust, and the smell of smoke still clings to him. Ted?
John Donvan just called in, and I'm getting the information from New York. I have forgotten, I knew it, but forgotten that both John's father and your father were New York City firemen. Just keep talking for a moment, because I know this is close to home, and there is one aspect of this story that the two of you have not spoken about, and just keep talking, if you would, about the possibility of survivors and what is being done to find people who might still be there.
Well, Ted, as I wasn't going to mention this, but the reality is my father is a retired New York City fireman, and my brother is an active fireman, and I can tell you that on Tuesday morning, my first thought was of him, and thankfully he called very early, and I was able to assure the rest of the family that he was safe. So, of course, it's ironic to be thinking first of my father at a time like this, and then of my brother, who like many firemen, is second generation, you know, carrying on that tradition, because, as Tim said, they love it. They love the serving the public, and tough on the rest of us, but we appreciate the job that they do, as I think John does also.
I'd like you to pick up, though, on the notion of there may still be, as we have seen from all the earthquakes that we've covered over the years and other instances of terrorism where there are collapsed buildings, people can survive for extraordinary periods of time. Would the two of you just talk a little bit about what is being done to look for survivors?
Well, if John would, I don't know if John would like to pick up, but well, as Tim showed us, that they're working very carefully.
No, I didn't mean John.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Michelle. We've got this little bit of a delay here. I wanted you to talk to Tim, exactly.
Oh, Tim, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think, as you heard, Ted would like to expand more about what the efforts are being made to search for survivors.
Every effort's being made to search for survivors. In fact, shortly after I got there, there was some talk, some commotion about over in a far southeast corner that they thought that there was some sounds. So, you know, it's tough. It's really tough, but these guys are keeping the hope alive.
The other thing I think that's interesting to point out is that there isn't a lot of heavy equipment, and I think that that can be puzzling to people, except if you consider that one of the only hopes that survivors have is that they're trapped in an air pocket where perhaps there's a conjunction of heavy pieces of material. So one of the challenges for rescuers is to try to move as much heavy equipment, or rather heavy pieces of rubble, as they can without destroying the very thing that is keeping survivors alive. And I think that's one of the reasons you do not see large pieces of equipment rolling you know, willy-nilly across those piles of rubber, and why so much work is being done by hand.
Absolutely. It's all saws and cutting torches, and, as you saw, buckets and gloved hands.
And I think the silence, too, becomes important, because that's the only way that rescuers who are understandably running on adrenaline themselves, who are working in teams, can listen for the sounds of survivors. In fact, I think that is what becomes eerie at a moment like this, is just the amount of silence, or just the quality of the silence that so many people working so hard are able to achieve for the purpose of finding people. We also have heard reports of people on cell phones trying to call people to see if they can achieve some help in locating them, but the phone service here has been very spotty, in part because the World Trade Center tower was where the antennas were. So it's a very awful situation under the best of circumstances, but it's also, I think, this, as Tim was pointing out, this weird confluence of sort of horror and the kind of heartwarming effect of so many people working together for this purpose. And you saw that today.
It's a tremendous effort, and it just made me realize how long it's going to take to get all that stuff out of there.
How long had many of those men been working without sleep?
I couldn't tell you, except that they're in there and they have their schedules, and they're in there every day for whatever it is, 6, 7 hours at least, I'm sure. But they're rotating them now. I mean, they can't burn them out. They have a long road.
And of course, one of the